In this episode, we pretty much sit down with the smartest man in the room. Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Welcome to the Sea and Land Fitness Podcast. I'm Michael Sahno, the host. Today, we have an amazing guest. But before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Sea and Land Fitness. So head on over to www.sandlfit.com and pick up some gear and merchandise. Okay. So, as all of you know, I'm a recent graduate, August 11th, of the University of Florida's master's program in applied physiology and kinesiology. Let's make sure I get that at least right. And one of the professors, one of the amazing individuals that got me through this was Dr. Max Adolphs. He is a professor and lecturer in applied physiology and advanced/clinical physiology from the Department of Applied Physiology and Kinesiology, which resides within the College of Health and Human Performance at the University of Florida. Dr. Adolphs, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Oh, man. So tell us, so I went through your CV and I stopped reading after about 45 minutes because it is so enormous. For those of you who don't know what a CV is, it is sort of like an academic resume. You have taught at so many different places. Can you give us a little bit of your background and your journey into how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I played sports, hockey mostly, actually. And I took a real interest in sports and weightlifting as well. Hockey kind of got me into weightlifting, and then I got really serious about weightlifting, and that always, because of my interests related to sports and weightlifting, I was always interested in the human body. And then when I went to college, the human physiology courses I took really, really fascinated me. And that then resulted in me pursuing a degree in basically what would be the equivalent of exercise physiology. Because, again, it was like learning about the human physiology, which I loved and found amazing, but also then being able to relate it to my interest in performance in sports. And after I finished my degree, I went on and did a master's. I did all this in the Upper Peninsula, by the way.
Okay.
And when I started my master's degree, that's the first time that I really taught a class, like at least a lab section. So when I was doing my master's, I was teaching basically the lab section of what would be the equivalent of like anatomy.
Wow.
And I just loved teaching the material, and teaching the material actually allowed me to learn it even better and even more. So I just became kind of entrenched in that loop of teaching the material, learning the material, and then learning the material more from teaching the material. And I enjoyed it so much that then I continued to pursue a PhD after I finished my master's degree. Between my master's and my PhD, I taught like at a community college in Green Bay, Wisconsin for a while, just to get more experience teaching like anatomy and physiology. But then I did my PhD after after a short period of time at the Indiana University in Indianapolis, while I was simultaneously working at a small liberal arts college there, teaching anatomy and physiology courses to both undergraduate students and then also to physician assistant students. And then I finished my PhD while I was doing that and kept doing that for a few more years. And then finally, I came to the University of Florida, where I've continued to do really kind of the same thing, which is basically more strictly teach physiology courses to undergraduate, masters, and PhD students. And there's quite a lot of different physiology courses that I have taught in
Oh
that
my
period of time,
gosh.
which has been about 3 years now. So
Now,
maybe that was longer than you were looking for, but
no, that's okay. Like when I looked away from the camera, I was looking at your CV, and there's a block chart, like an Excel spreadsheet on your CV. And there are 27 different courses just in this block on numerous different subjects. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy, holy cow. So the reason why I say you're the smartest man in the room. So when I was at undergrad, I did, originally I was doing a double major, but I wound up doing one of the majors as a minor. But one of the majors that I was in, I would go and I would ask questions of the faculty, and they would say, oh, that's a Wasserman question. So that would mean that's at a level that, you got to go ask Dr. Wasserman about that. So when I got to University of Florida, I would ask Dr. Harrison, who's the strength and conditioning guy, or Dr. Beatty, who is the sports psychology guy, because these fields intermingle, mesh sometimes, and they would say, oh, that's an Adolphs question. You got to ask him that. So I'm right now working on getting my CSCS.
good.
I go on the 26th for my exam. I'm a little nervous, but I know the material, anatomy, physiology wise, because of you. So, you're tremendous. So, speaking of physiology, what is exercise physiology?
Exercise physiology itself is, I think, quite easy to define. It's just, well, first of all, what is physiology, which is the study of the function of the human body. You study how neurons, muscle fibers, etc., function. And then with exercise physiology, you're studying how those cells and systems function during exercise. So, in general physiology, you might learn, simply how muscle fibers contract on maybe an intermediate level. But then you would focus in something like exercise physiology much more heavily on the different types of contractions that those muscle fibers produce in different circumstances during exercise, and how those would influence things like fatigue and adaptations, specifically related to exercise. So you would kind of take that same idea and apply it to all the different systems in the human body.
Well, your courses also relied heavily on neuromuscular interaction and action potentials and the feeding of the chemistry set that is our human body. If you don't eat this, then you won't have the calcium to go into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Ooh, pat myself on the back. I learned a lot from you. But all of those things, you start to see these relationships and these interactions between these different disciplines.
Absolutely. No, one of the most amazing things about human physiology, when you really learn it, is how everything is interconnected. And if you can connect to those things, it's really a pretty beautiful puzzle to put together. So
that's awesome. Now, how we just touched on this actually. So how can understanding human physiology help the average person? Or actually, we'll start with the average person. How can it help them live a more healthy life?
How could understanding exercise or general physiology help someone live a healthy life?
General physiology, not just a healthier life, but I'm assuming they would have a better relationship with their caregiver because they'd be able to explain things and have a more understanding, a more buy-in into their health.
I don't think that you have to look very far, at the statistics on the number of people in this country and around the world, especially in developed countries, that are, many of them at least, that are obese. And the number of health problems are, the number one killer in the United States is cardiovascular disease, which is terrible. And most of that is going to be related to a combination of eating a poor diet and a lack of exercise, which then results in, typically something like visceral obesity that then results in heart disease, and ultimately, if you don't stop it or reverse it down the line, death. So knowing about human physiology, some basics about it, I think for most people, maybe not everybody, but would be tremendously helpful in aiding them in making smarter decisions about their life. I mean, if it's just about improving lifestyle, I think, in living a healthier life, if you understand on a basic level that, well, fat cells are actually incredibly metabolically active, especially visceral adipocytes, fat cells, and you have a basic idea of like what those fat cells, the hormones and different molecules, chemical messengers that they secrete and produce to go into the system, your cardiovascular system, and the effects that those can have on so many different cells in the body. I think an appreciation of that and an understanding of that, I think would be helpful for somebody to
maybe make better
make some meaningful changes in their life. I think too many people think, for example, of adipocytes, fat cells, as just being this place where triglycerides are stored, right, where fat is stored. And that's not what they are at all. I mean, we used to think that a really long time ago, but it's become evident that, very evident that fat cells are probably one of the most metabolically active tissues in the human body. I mean, it's a huge part of the endocrine system. And if you can understand what the implications are for being overweight, I just think that it would be helpful then in you making decisions about exercising and eating. And I mean, to that end, physiology, exercise physiology, involves a little bit of understanding nutrition as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a nutrition class, but there's a good amount of understanding nutrition and metabolism that's involved in physiology as well. And when people learn about nutrition, I think it's so incredibly mind-opening when you really learn about basic nutrition and the impact that those nutrients have inside of the human body. Learning the basic difference between saturated and unsaturated fat, learning the different types of carbohydrates, also known as sugars, learning about protein and the impact that those have on really all the cells in your body that rely upon them. It allows people, of course, to make smarter decisions if they're more familiar with what those nutrients are and how to find them and what to look for.
Well, I think one of the things, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt you.
Please.
I think one of the interesting things is we talk about a lot of things in strength and conditioning, like nutrient timing. I'm just sticking with the subject of nutrition, but understanding why, not just why nutrient timing is important, but understanding what the process that occurs from the moment it passes your lips, from the moment it goes down your esophagus, from the moment it goes into your small intestine, and how different. So an example is, aerobic athletes, endurance athletes. They're instructed. I think the instruction now is that they take a number of different sugars, enough number of glucose, fructose, sucrose in order to allow the different uptake mechanisms to work, so one's not getting clogged. And if you have that understanding that, oh, it's almost like having three different tanks in your car, one for regular, one for medium, one for high test, and being able to pull from all of them because you're overwhelming the engine with just one kind. That's a horrible analogy, but it's the only one I could come up with. But I mean,
No, I don't think so.
Understanding those types of mechanisms help you make better choices.
I think beyond that, though, understanding the mechanisms would allow you, more importantly, to critically analyze what you're being told. Because there's certainly controversy around, like the consumption of fructose versus glucose, because ultimately, really all the monosaccharides are converted to glucose within the liver. So, you can certainly have a debate about the value of consuming fructose versus glucose and the impact that has on glycogen and a variety of other things. But that's an impossible debate or thought to have if you don't understand the basics of physiology. And at that point, you're just being told something, and it's easy to believe it, which happens way too much. And I was trying to answer that previous question without thinking more specifically about performance, because I think what you're saying leads me more so into the.
Well, let's
the
move
thought
into
of
that. Let's move
performance.
into performance. That's okay. That's fine.
Yeah. I just think that when you think of performance, I mean, less so thinking about just living a healthier lifestyle, which of course I think if you understand, some basic nutrition and how nutrition influences cells and how obesity influences cardiovascular health and everything else. I think that of course informs you and allows you to hopefully make better decisions and critically analyze the things that you're being told. But when it comes to performance, I think it's of course equally or even more important, because when you think about performance, I just think the number of people that are just told, what to do from their strength and conditioning coach or their high school football coach or whatever it is, and oftentimes that person is quite uneducated. It's easy to just believe all of those things that you're being told and to do them when in fact they certainly could be actually having a negative impact.
Well, I think an example could be your coach has a degree in education and teaches World Civ, and he's giving you nutritional advice on,
Right.
You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. That's what I mean. That's like probably 75% of what's going on.
And he's giving you the advice that his coach from 20 years ago gave him.
Right. 1985. Yeah. It's like, I think that it just leads into such a deeper discussion, which is there's so much information that is just wrong that exists within just the sports performance and sports world. It's a lot of the information is just a lot of it's just debunked information from like the 1940s.
Wow.
And it's still pervasive throughout sports and throughout training. And to answer your question more meaningfully about the benefit of actually knowing some basics of human physiology, it allows you to really think through some of those things, that you're being told to do. And like, should I be doing them really this way? Is there a different way that I could do them? Might I respond differently just because of, maybe who I am to certain types of training regimens? I think understanding, where hypertrophy, at least the theoretical idea of where muscle hypertrophy comes from, would certainly serve a benefit to a lot of people. Understanding where strength comes from, because strength and hypertrophy aren't necessarily the same thing. I mean, what is the actual physiological explanation of increased strength. And I don't think anybody has a perfect answer to that, but we can be certain, it's not physiologically, it doesn't physiologically have to be related to improvements in hypertrophy. So to understand the difference between those two and where they come from and how different training regimens may influence hypertrophy versus strength, I just think it allows somebody to really think about what they're being told to do, and if it makes any sense based upon what they've learned and the literature that's available to them to read, studies that have been done, because hopefully an education would teach you how to look at published research and then be able to really think about, is this doing what I'm being told that it's supposed to do, and maybe how could I do it differently? I think the same thing goes for like aerobic and anaerobic adaptations. Like if you're an endurance athlete, clearly you're looking to maximize the aerobic system within muscle cells, especially slower and more intermediate twitch muscle fibers. And how can you do that? Understanding something like metabolism is one of the most complicated concepts, I think, in all of human physiology. And no one knows a lot of these things for sure, exactly how things happen.
It is so difficult to learn. But once you got it, you got it.
Yeah, that is true. But even then, there's so much controversy around metabolism to this day, and that's not going to change anytime soon. There's just so many things that we don't know. And understanding basic metabolism, meaning how cells break down macronutrients to make ATP, at least if we're talking about energy metabolism. If you understand the basics of that, and you understand the different muscle fiber types and how those muscle fiber types, how their metabolisms are different from each other, at least in the way that they use different energy systems, to different degrees, I should say, it would allow you to think through, how should I train based upon this knowledge to get the maximal benefit to my, sort of aerobic training that I'm doing. And same thing with anaerobic, like if you're a sprinter or any type of, kind of agility, high intensity athlete, knowing the difference between the muscle fiber types and the way that they, consume macronutrients to make ATP and the way that they adapt under different circumstances. It allows you to analyze what's happening to my body right now based upon the type of training that I'm doing. Is it working, and what maybe should I do differently? And if you don't have that background, it's just impossible, I think, to make much sense of what you're doing. And you're just going to do what you're told, rather than having the ability to really think about what it is that you're doing and potentially do it in a better way. So
I think one of the interesting things about it is that so to put it as simply as possible, the purpose of the human body, and I was having this conversation with my wife, and when I told my wife this, she went, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way, and that's so depressing." And I was like, "Wait a minute, no." I said, the purpose of the human body is nothing more than to propel the brain through space and to either experience or serve it, meaning to, give it nutrients, forage, whatever. And that's it. That's, as simple, if you wanted to get down to the nuts and bolts and the simplicity of it, that's all it is. And sport serves, maybe serves the experiential, but doesn't serve the other. So this is so horrible. We're going against nature by playing sports, but I love it. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't worry. But you start to have this, once you have this understanding of that purpose, you start to look at how do these things occur? So one of the things I remember from years ago, probably when I was in the Navy or something, Velcro. So we all know what Velcro is. And do you know where Velcro comes from?
I do not.
Okay, so this guy was standing in a field and thistles were attaching themselves to his clothing. And he went and looked at it under a microscope, and there are these hooks and loops, and it's nature's way of connecting one thing to another in order to propagate, in order to spread seeds over a larger distance. And I've always thought, with you, have you ever had Velcro that you get it together and you're like, oh my god, this is not coming apart, and you're like just trying to yank it, and it's the strongest Velcro you've ever had. And I've
Just
always
yesterday, actually.
yeah,
I
and
have these blocks in my car that are Velcro to the carpet or whatever it is in the back, and yeah, it's like trying to remove cement. But
oh my
anyway.
gosh, yeah, no, that's okay. So immediately when we were talking about myosin and actin, I went Velcro. Holy cow. Not only does it have that type of hook and loop quality, I mean, of course, it's not, it's similar in function, not in form, but the fact that it does that, but then it chemically self-releases, is just phenomenal to me. That this happens, that this occurs, and that this developed, and that this myosin actin reaction, which which allows for the constriction of our muscles, exists in your pets, exists in the fish, exists. Does it exist in plants, like plants that contract, or is it something similar?
I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, no, we're going on a Wikipedia rabbit hole right there, right? Um,
I think so.
but it's phenomenal. And having
Yeah.
go on. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I'd imagine that in plants there is something that is structurally similar to something like actin, but I don't know for sure.
I mean, it's phenomenal. And when you start to explore these things and you start to explore how pretty much amazing they are, and then you go on YouTube, and then you go on Instagram or TikTok, you want to smash your head against the wall, because you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that 16-year-old kid is doing that. That's the worst thing. Who told them this?
Well, probably somebody else on TikTok
Yes,
and Instagram.
absolutely.
Do that. Which, unfortunately, like I was saying, I think this is where, well, I mean, you bring up a great point, because I think that's actually where probably 90% of people actually get their information from. If it's not coming from their high school coach, it's coming from some person on TikTok that's trying to, make money doing whatever. I don't know. There's just so much terrible information that I don't have TikTok and Instagram, because I'd lose my mind if I did. But I see enough of it where I mean, it just reaffirms the fact that I would not want any of that stuff, because it's just terrible, so much of it. I mean, there's some good things on there as well. There is, but I think for every good thing and accurate source of information, there's probably 100 non-accurate and worthless probably pieces of information.
What are
as well.
some of those? What are some of those that you're seeing right now? Give like maybe 3 or 4.
Oh, you mean about like performance or something?
Performance, physiology, the effects of something, purported effects of something.
Sure. I mean, trying to sell supplements, for example. I mean, that's been going on forever. But the ability to market those things with Instagram and things like TikTok and whatnot, I mean, it's just, it's so much more broad, your ability to reach people compared to what it was, in the early 2000s, when you had to go to the GNC or whatever it was to look at supplements.
Hey, what can I help you with? What can I help you with?
No, exactly. And I just think that I don't know how. I mean, I think I have an idea of how it works. Is you find people who have a big following, a big fitness
Mm-hmm.
following. And if you're a company that has a lot of money, what do? You tell them, well, we'll pay you to advertise our supplements. And I would say most of the time, from what I see, these people don't really know much about human physiology. They don't know much about real physiology as it relates to strength training. And then they're just selling a supplement based upon probably information that they're getting from the supplement company, which has a real desire
To
to
sell
make a
more
lot of money.
supplements. Yeah.
And a lot of the supplement companies, they fund studies, and they only want positive results from those studies. And then they take the statistics from those studies, and they amplify the statistics. Again, I don't think anything that they're doing is by any means illegal, but they're taking, snapshots of different portions of the study to make the supplement. And why not, if you're trying to make enormous amounts of money, but to make that supplement look as unbelievably effective as possible. I mean, when I was growing up, the advertisements, like in the GNC and Vitamin Shop, or whatever it was, for certain supplements, they were just so outrageous. Increase your strength by 375% over the course of whatever period of time based upon this study, which the statistics had actually been, not manipulated, but done in a way to make it look like this one small variable had done this. And then they extrapolate that and say that that's 375% of something, of, who knows what variable they used. But that's the kind of information that you're getting. And to somebody that's uneducated about physiology and about literature, as it relates to, what I mean by that is studies, they're just going to look at that and they're going to see this supplement that they don't know anything about, that's being advertised by somebody who's, I guess, largely influential. And they're going to think that this person that's a big, as again, influential, is telling them that if they take this supplement, they're going to improve their bench press or potentially put on 20 pounds of muscle. Of course, they're going to take it.
And
I think
on top of that, they also don't know what the inherent metabolic effects, what its effects on protein synthesis. Is it an interrupt? Is it something that stops a chemical process within the body? Does it have a neurological effect?
Or is it nothing?
Yes.
Oftentimes it's just like creatine or something. And really, if you look at the package, it's being sold, who knows what fancy name they give it. But really, it's just creatine, which has been around forever. And again, you're buying something that's largely innocuous. It's not going to hurt you, but it's certainly not going to provide you these massive benefits. And with fancy marketing and taking advantage of an influencer who's maybe not all that educated on physiology and training and wants to make money, it's very easy then to sell that to people and make a lot of money, when in reality they're not going to benefit that much from it. And again, you can buy creatine for it's the same creatine. It's so cheap. And you could be paying $70 or $80 a month to get something that you could buy for $3.
But the other thing about that, and I'm glad you brought up creatine, because creatine has a threshold limit, meaning you can only use the cell itself can only process so much creatine in a certain span of time. You can buffer it. Yeah. You can buffer it and increase the creatine within the cell. It's phosphorylating the ADP back into ATP, but there's a limit on how much you can do. There's only so many RPMs that it will go to.
Yeah, I think too, also, there's plenty of evidence that if somebody eats a very high protein diet already,
the
notion that taking a lot of creatine is going to be able to benefit them is pretty poor. So, I mean, again, I'm not saying that's not going to serve any benefit, but, regardless of whatever the case might be, creatine is by no means any sort of magic bullet. But most of the research that's been done on it, there's an extensive amount of research that's been done on creatine.
Also, a lot of people don't understand that creatine is only good for for the phosphagen system. It's only good for, it's not going to help you as an endurance runner. There are studies that when you when type 2 muscle becomes more activated, that it does dip into creatine. But like you said, if you're on a high protein diet, it's not advantageous for anything other than that quick 30 seconds.
Well, right. And I mean, if you look at sprinting studies that have been done with creatine, maybe you could improve a sprint by a tenth of a second or something. Or with weight training, maybe over the course of a couple months, you may be able to put on an extra half a pound of muscle or something like this. None of it is significant, and none of it is anywhere near the way that it is still advertised to this day. And yet again, if you know some basic physiology onto the whole pathway that taking creatine supplements targets, when I was younger, it was like people talked about creatine like it was a steroid.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's so ridiculous. Like it's nothing near, it's natural. I mean, you can just use creatine in any meat product. I mean, for the most part that you're eating, you eat a lot of chicken and beef, you're going to get a lot of creatine in your body. Like there's nothing.
Oh, I don't want to take that. I don't want to get huge. Oh.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And if you have a basic understanding, again, of physiology, of exercise physiology more specifically, you would know that when somebody's advertising something like that, they're trying to dupe you. I mean, whether they know it or not, the person selling it, genuinely, I think plenty of people they believe in the products that they're selling. But oftentimes something like that, it's being so over-exaggerated in terms of the effects that it's going to have. And you would know that if you understood physiology and you understood the research that's been done on it for decades. You would know that it may serve a small benefit to you, but you shouldn't expect anything serious from it. And also that you're going to put on an enormous amount of water weight, most likely, which is where people have always gotten the impression that if somebody's taking creatine, that it's like a steroid, because it's not uncommon for someone to put on 10 or 20 pounds of water weight when they're taking a bunch of creatine. And then it looks like the person's gotten huge taking creatine, but it's like as soon as you stop taking the supplement, the water weight goes away, and the water weight wasn't strength. I mean, it wasn't muscle, so you didn't really it's just, it's take a massive amount of sodium, and it's going to bloat you too. It doesn't mean that you're going to increase your bench press by 300 pounds. Like it's all of those things are readily available. The knowledge is there. It's available for people to learn. And if you know these things, I just think performance in life in general is much easier and much less confusing, and you'd probably save a lot of money too.
Yes. When you said the lose water weight thing, I immediately thought of my son, years ago watching SpongeBob, and it popped into my head and I had to mention it. So getting the right information is the most important thing. But you and I have had...
I just don't... One thing.
Yes.
The right information, I don't... Just the term right information, because what's right? So many things are... We don't know what's right, there's a lot of controversy around things. And I try my absolute best to never think that I almost always try to say, I don't know if this is right. This is just what we think at the moment as what might be right. And having the ability to know that, well, there's a lot of possibilities for this particular pathway and for why this type of performance training may do this or that, or why it might not. Again, it's good to know that, and it would, of course, benefit somebody in their training to be aware. We can talk more about that later on.
No problem.
To be aware of the fact that, well, oftentimes the things we think are the right answer right now, they're not going to be the right answer in 10 years, and we might look back on it and think how ridiculous it was that we thought that was the right answer.
So speaking of that, this brings me into something that I brought up with you on numerous occasions in numerous conversations. So the question is, how effective is academia in getting the most up-to-date information on the human body to the overall populace? And there are instances when I've taken courses and you've given lectures and you've said, okay, what I have to teach you, excuse me, what I have to teach you right now is the generally accepted idea of how this works. There's a lot of debate, and it could turn out that this isn't how it works at all. So, how applied is why, if we're calling ourselves, and other departments as well, applied physiology, why isn't that information trickling out at a greater rate to the general population and also to the medical community?
God, yeah, that's a good point.
I have a cough. I'm so sorry. I keep.
No, it's fine. I just think that's such it's a hard question to answer, because I mean,
one of the things, I think it takes so much time to learn this information, and there is such an investment in learn. So remember, we spoke in the beginning about metabolism and how labor intensive it is to learn it, how complicated it is. You spent, in some cases, an entire semester learning it and getting it down pat. You've invested yourself. Do you want to discard that when a new idea comes or a new understanding comes by? Is that maybe part of it?
I agree. Absolutely. So, part of it, because I remember when I really started to learn, for example, that there's a really strong possibility that the production of lactate, what was historically called anaerobic glycolysis, which is more commonly called fast glycolysis now, that whole process may have very little, why it happens may have very little or nothing to do, almost nothing to do with oxygen. I don't even know how many years of my life I dedicated to learning, cellular metabolism with relationship to anaerobic and aerobic glycolysis, as it was called. And I was very proud of myself after years of learning that material. And then when I started to, really see a lot of the studies that were starting to really disprove it, it's like a paradigm shift. And you realize, the first thing that comes to mind is I've spent years teaching people something that a huge fundamental concept that might be wrong. And you feel terrible about it, first of all, because it's like, I can't believe I've done this.
Should college have CEUs?
Probably. And it's not like there's going to be necessarily a huge portion of the class that's going to care about that, because they're taking a million other classes and whatnot. But there is a portion, especially at the graduate level, who do want to know it, and they're going to use it, and they may teach it themselves. And now you've propagated something that's wrong, and it's going to be taught to other people because of you. And it's like, I think the instinct there is to say, oh, this paper is nonsense. It can't be right. This it's got to be wrong. Because, you don't want to, at least me internally, it's like, I didn't want to force myself to have to learn something that I spent so much time, more time than anything else in physiology, learning. I didn't want to have to relearn components of it because that just sounded agonizing. And two, I just didn't want it to be true because of the number of people that I, had spent so much time teaching nonsense to, not nonsense, but outdated information to, or at least not giving them the newest, which clearly partly true information that it wasn't provided to them. So,
and what's difficult too is sometimes some of the detractors of this new information are not small names. They're big names that come and say, and like you said, they're invested in this. They've written textbooks on this and are getting,
What's clear is it's true. like when you think of like something like anaerobic glycolysis,
Hmm.
which again, the term probably doesn't even make sense anymore. The It's just wrong that something like anaerobic or fast glycolysis only happens when there's insufficient amounts of oxygen inside of a muscle cell. It's just the evidence is so overwhelmingly true. Um,
Why don't we
and
split it? I mean, like you could have it split in two and have it be cellular metabolism and then mitochondrial metabolism for the others. You know what I mean? Like sort of delineate it that way and then branch off.
I've started to do that in my more advanced classes because I just feel an obligation to, because it's right. But here's the thing, and this gets me back to your original question, which is where I was actually going with this, but I tend to have very long-winded responses.
That's okay. Don't worry.
That's really difficult, like internally, one, to do that, to accept that you are wrong. Much of what you've been learning has been largely wrong. At least 20% of it maybe is wrong, wrong. And you've taught this information to hundreds of people, and it was, it's the way that you taught it was right based upon what you read in the textbooks and the research studies that were done. But the new evidence is quite clear that it's wrong. That's hard to accept something like that, especially something so foundational to exercise physiology. So you spend a lot of time denying it and wanting to look at studies that would disprove it. And so you just keep, in many ways, just teaching what you were teaching, hoping that, what this other person is proposing is just inaccurate. Anyways.
Are you saying academia is so much like TMZ it's not even funny?
Yeah. What I was actually going to say is that's hard enough when most of the population still believes that muscle fibers produce lactic acid, and that is what causes them to fatigue. That is information that started in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and it still exists in most of the performance population to this day.
It's still in textbooks.
We know that this is wrong. We've known that this is wrong since like the 1960s, 70s for sure. And that information somehow still has not reached the general population. And that I don't know that I have an explanation for how that's possible. Because I guess it gets passed down from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And most people don't take exercise physiology or physiology. You don't need to take exercise. General physiology would teach you this too. As a course, I don't know what percentage of the American public actually takes human physiology. Probably not that many, I would guess. And how many of them are going to be invested enough to learn about lactate versus lactic acid production and fatigue? Even fewer. And you would need enough people with enough resources and enough marketing to get that information out to the average person and break a cycle that's been being passed down for generations. And I don't know how you do it.
I think I have an idea. I think actually a quick way to do it would be to have someone. We have a lot of organizations. We have the NSCA, American College of Sports Medicine. What else do we have? NASM, and all of these fitness organizations. They could push it. They could each make a video called "The Lactic Acid Myth," or share it. You know what I mean? Someone could make a documentary. Ooh, you want? Ooh. I just figured out.
That's a good idea.
That's a really good idea, and get it on Netflix and have people go, wait. And then that. Go on.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think it would be tremendously popular because those things are actually so popular with the general public. I think that if you were to say the term lactic acid, in like a weight room or into a group of people that play sports, which is a huge percentage of the United States, basically everybody would have heard the term.
Oh my
at least
gosh.
something like it. And they probably would have heard that it accumulates in muscle and in the blood and makes the body fatigue. And that stuff getting in there causes fatigue, and you got to get it out somehow. Like I would assume that would be, most people would actually be familiar with that. And if you had something like a documentary or something that actually covered that, I think it would be tremendously popular.
All right.
Because it'd be engaging, be fun.
I think we're gonna do
There's
that.
definitely very engaging ways to talk about it, and
you're gonna be in
I
it.
think
You're gonna be in it. So
I would love doing something like that. It'd be so fun. I'm not that creative in terms of creating like videos.
I mean, you could just, like you said, go to a gym and just ask. Oh yeah, that's what makes you. Oh, absolutely. That's why I feel fatigued. And you could say, well, what about hydrogen ions or inorganic phosphate? What?
Well, then yet again, I mean, this brings us back to our original part of the conversation, which was you really need to understand basic physiology to know where ADP, inorganic phosphate, calcium, etc., where does it all come from, and what's its relationship to why a muscle contracts? And you've got to understand those things before you can really appreciate what may cause muscle fibers to fatigue.
So,
because if you don't, it's much easier to just hear lactic acid causes muscle fibers to fatigue and believe it.
Okay.
Whatever.
I'm doing it. This is happening. All right. Yes.
You want to make a documentary? Sign me up.
All right. Cool. It's on. This is gonna happen. All right. The last question I have for you. What is the biggest question in human physiology that you'd like to have answered?
I think I've been talking about it.
All right, actually. There we go.
I would love to know a couple things, and I don't think they're going to be answered in my lifetime, which is what actually causes muscle fibers to fatigue? What causes skeletal muscle fibers to fatigue? Nobody really knows. It's constantly changing. What's clear is that lactic acid, which isn't actually produced by muscle fibers, does not cause muscle fibers to fatigue. That we can be certain of. But what else causes muscle fibers to fatigue? Well, there's a lot of possibilities. And there's probably many things that are involved in it. But no, I don't think anybody could tell you exactly what causes muscle fibers to fatigue. And I would also be curious, to find out what's the true pathway that's involved with the production of lactate, like where I would love to really have all the answers to metabolism. The aerobic versus the anaerobic, probably more appropriately called the slow versus the fast system, and what dictates when and why those different pathways are utilized to varying degrees. And there just aren't answers to that. And I think that those are the things that I would love to have answered. And I don't see it any time in the future, but that's also why I love physiology, because I love not knowing the answers to things and learning new things. And I also think it's just more generally speaking, there's such a huge misconception among the general populace that we know a lot about the human body. That is probably the biggest misconception of anything.
Whoa!
People think we know a lot about how the body works. And we know infinitely more about how the body works than we did 100 years ago. But we know on the bigger scale, we know almost nothing. Circuits within the brain, different neurotransmitters in different locations of the cerebrum, in muscle fatigue, how drugs work. The vast majority of prescription drugs, it's so much of it is just, it's throwing poop at a wall and waiting until something sticks, and then you're like, okay, that worked. Let's stick with that. I think most people, if they were really familiar with that, it would just blow their mind, because there's this pervasive myth that we know the answers to almost everything about the human body, and it couldn't be any further from the truth. We don't even know basic things. I mean, like how Tylenol really works.
We don't know how the human body heals wounds. Like,
well, sure.
I I didn't when we went we were going over that in I think basic physiology, and it clearly said that the actual mechanism and how it works is unknown. But what we do know is that
portions of it that are clear, but there are portions of it that are a total mystery. And that is true for basically every cellular process. You know, it's true. We're constantly discovering new components to skeletal muscle fibers. You know, like you think that you learn the sliding filament model or theory, and you've learned everything about the way that a muscle fiber contracts. It's you know, like it's total nonsense. Like the whole process of excitation, contraction, coupling is infinitely complicated. And there's so much of it that we still don't understand. Not even close to everything that could be understood. And really, really basic things that a lot of people think we know the answers to, like, and we must know the answers to. Like, again, like I said, like this drug Tylenol that everybody takes, you know, acetaminophen, it you know, reduces headaches. You know, that makes sense. It's got but if you actually learn about it, there's plenty of components to it that we actually don't know how it does it.
Wow.
We don't know where migraines even, you know, we don't even know what migraines really come from. There's a huge difference between migraines and headaches. If you don't know really where migraines come from, we have certainly educated and good ideas and drugs to use to treat them, but we don't really know where migraines come from. How are you going to create drugs to target something you don't really know where it's coming from? You're just coming up with ideas and making drugs that target particular proteins and then seeing if it works and then being like, all right. And then you find out 15 years later that the drug wasn't actually doing at all what it was doing. And like it actually works for something that's totally unrelated. I mean, this kind of stuff happens all the time.
And your liver needs to be removed.
Yeah, no, it's so, I just think that your question of what are the things I want answered, for me personally, I mean, yeah, I'm interested in things like fatigue and metabolism, but I think more broadly, so little about the human body has been answered. There's hundreds of things I'd love to know the answers to that there are not answers to. I think also people think like, what could people be doing research about anymore? Like we've figured everything out.
Oh, yeah.
I just think all that is so laughable, you know, like if you had any idea like how little we actually know and how much research is needed to even make, you know, minor, you know,
breakthroughs,
advancements. Yeah. It's you know, like somebody, I think a couple of years ago, somebody won the Nobel Prize for just figuring something basic out about, you know, I can't remember if it was a thermoreceptor or what. It was like, but this was, you know, like it's not that complicated, you would think.
Yeah.
But it's something that we thought worked a particular way for a long period of time. And then we figured out the way that you know, there's actually a specific receptor that senses, you know, this particular somatosensation. And, you know, it should have been relatively basic, but it wasn't basic at all.
Jeez.
So I don't know.
No, that's okay. That's okay. All right. Dr. Adolphs, this has been tremendous. I got to have you on again because I have about 13 different episodes that I want to talk to you about, different subjects I want to talk to you about.
I would love to talk more specifically about specific things, you know, because so much of what you asked me, like each individual small component could have each been its own hour.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's do it again soon.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it. You are a rock star. And that's pretty much it. All right, guys. That's the episode. And we'll see you next time. Later.